Okay, welcome to our Erev Shabbat class, Parashat Debarim, on the cusp of Tisha B'Av. The question is, do our enemies fear us? And should our enemies fear us? On a day that we commemorate the day after tomorrow night, in which, unfortunately, over the course of many centuries, we suffered terribly at the hands of our enemies, the different oppression, the different persecutions, the tragic episodes and eras and times, the different places and centuries in our history, the many enemies who with great hate and disdain for us and HaKadosh Baruch Hu caused us hardships. It pays to understand something about HaKadosh Baruch Hu's handling of our enemies and their perspective of us. So we have the book of Devarim, we have the Parashat of Devarim. We have in the middle or towards the end of the parasha a recall, a reflection by Moshe Rabbeinu. Essentially, that's what he's doing from the parashiot of Devarim, Vat Hanan, Na'ekev, and a little bit of Re'eh. He's reflecting upon what occurred over the course of the last 39 years or so in the desert, and a lot of focus really on the first or second year. But here, he reflects on something that just occurred recently, which is, as Am Yisrael is tracking towards the land, and they have to find an entry point to Eretz Yisrael, they were confronted by the territories of Edom, of Sihon, of Bashan, and the question as to how to enter the land without intruding on these territories. And if you reflect back on when this actually happened, which is in Parashat Hukat, we will see that in this parasha, Moshe Rabbeinu elaborates on much more on the details of those incidences, provides us with insight that we didn't have before when those battles actually, or when those confrontations actually took place, and fills in many of the historical gaps, as happens sometimes in the Torah, that when a story is retold, there is much more articulation the second time around. Give you some examples. So here we're told in the book of Devarim, and this is all occurring, and generally speaking, in Perek Bet, in Parashat Devarim, we're told, I want you to circumvent Edom. Edom is the land of Esav, and you can't enter it, you can't take from his land at all, you can't conquer it, as happened in Parashat Hukat. In fact, over there we were told messengers were sent, and we asked to pass through peacefully, and we were rejected. Here we're just told that they had to circumvent. Here we're also told that we had to circumvent, or we couldn't conquer, and we were warned and cautioned not to cause any confrontational detriment to the land of Moab and Ammon, and because they were given to Lot and his heirs for inheritance. It says nothing about that actually in Parashat Hukat. And then, of course, we're told about Sihon, Melech HaAmori. Moshe Rabbeinu sent messengers, and some of these Pesukim are repeating almost verbatim from Parashat Hukat. Sent messengers to Sihon, peacefully saying, let us pass through your land. We're not going to interrupt anything. If we take food, we'll pay for it. And Sihon came out to wage war. But here, greater detail was given in the aftermath of that battle between Am Yisrael and Sihon Melech HaAmori. When it actually occurred, we were told that he waged war against us, and we were able to conquer his land, and we took all his cities. Here, in much greater detail, we are told that we smited him, we conquered him and his children and his entire land. We captured and overtook all of his cities. We did not, we left nothing, we left no survivors. As Emori is one of the 7 nations, we're told, Lo tahayeh kol neshamat, command of the Torah, kill everyone. Only the livestock we left for ourselves. It names some of the cities. It says, "Et hakol natan Adonai Eloheinu lefanenu." God spared nothing. He put our enemies and everything in their entirety belonging to them to us. And so that was definitely more elaborate than the episode when it actually occurred in Chukat. And then afterwards, when Og Melech HaBashan, taking initiative without any provocation whatsoever, decided to antagonize us and come and battle against us. When it actually happened in Parashat Chukat, Hashem said, don't worry, this is yours as well. You got it. I'm going to put them in your hands. It simply says in one pasuk that he destroyed Og and his family and his nation and didn't leave anything over. Here in this parasha, in far more greater detail, we're told that indeed Hashem gave their land and their people over in our hands. Again, same terminology with Sihon. Nakeu ad biti sarid. No remnants whatsoever. And we conquered all their cities. It says, Lo hayach there wasn't a single neighborhood or city or town. 60 cities that we overtook. And there's some description of those cities. They were well-fortified cities with powerful, tall walls. In those days, without Air Force, fortified cities were unbreachable, with gates, with great bolts of iron. And yet we overtook everything and left nothing and wiped them out completely. But I want to focus on two very critical facts, bits of information that we're told in this parasha that we knew nothing about prior. And I think on almost the eve of Tisha B'Av, the insight that this gives us about the enemies vis-a-vis Am Yisrael in times of salvation is very enlightening for us and gives us a little bit of knowledge about the way God handles the enemies that was not so clear from the first time around. Number one, we're told in this parasha, let's go back, fast forward, to the scene against Sihon Melech HaAmori. And we're told that Kadosh Baruch Hu tells Moshe Rabbeinu, prior to him waging war against us, Velo Abba, Sihon Melech Heshbon Ha'abirenu Bo. Heshbon did not allow us to pass through his land, although we asked permission very peacefully. Ki hiksha Adonai Elohecha et rucho ve'imes et lebabo. Because God hardened his spirit and his heart Leman titov bi'adecha hayom hazeh, in order so that we can successfully overtake him. Now, we were told nothing about that when the episode actually happened. And in fact, that is so reminiscent about Paro and those confrontations during the times of the 10 plagues in Egypt. But here we're given insight about something that apparently is a habit of God. And Rabbeinu Bachye, in fact, explains that all evil enemies, all evil rulers, when they, in a very belligerent, arrogant way, confront not just Am Yisrael, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and they keep stubbornly to their evil ways, when they cross a certain threshold of acts of evil, there, Kadosh Baruch Hu turns on the switch, takes away their free will, as the Rambam explains in Mishneh Torah, when he deals with philosophically, in the laws of Yesodot HaTorah, where all men have free will. It's a principle of this world and God and humanity, with exception. The exception is with certain amount of evil. And now the insight being provided to us is that not only Paro, but yet Sihon Melech HaAmori, and in fact, for all times, whenever there is evil that reaches a certain level, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will indeed remove the free will, the gift given to man, from that evil leader and his constituents and his army, harden their heart, and by that, let their subsequent punishment be that much exacerbated. Ladies and gentlemen, this is an insight that leads us in all times of confrontation, and especially in times of salvation, to tell us it's very telling about what's going on right now. Hamas, it's irrational that these people were absolutely wiping them out. We're wiping out their armies, their cities, their economy. It's so against logic, the fact that they keep coming back. They don't put their arms down. They're stubborn. They're holding fast and strong and confronting us till the very end. They're committing military and societal suicide. Who is to tell us that Kadosh Baruch Hu hasn't already hardened the hearts of them, their leaders, their constituents, and their army? From this insight, we're led to believe that certainly that is the case. And in fact, the Abarbanel teaches us that Moshe Rabbeinu himself, back in the day with Sihon Melech HaAmori, set this up. How so? Because a few Pesukim prior we're told what we knew about from the first episode. I sent messengers and I held out a hand for peace. The problem is that in this parasha, it's not where the story begins. Because a few Pesukim prior, we're told that Kadosh Baruch Hu informed Moshe and Am Yisrael by extension, I want you now to start traveling past Nahal Arnon, because God put Sihon Melech Heshbon HaAmori and his land and his people in your hands. It was advanced knowledge to Moshe Rabbeinu that there would be war and that we would be successful. So why in the world is Moshe then sending a fig leaf for possible peace in advance to Sihon and asking to pass through his land if he already knew there would be war? And some answers are offered. One is simply to show Am Yisrael that, in retrospect, when we win the war, this guy was no pushover. This guy was very bold and brave, Sihon Melech HaAmori, powerful, and he very confidently rejected our offer for peace and came up against us. But it's also, said Moshe Rabbeinu, was the litmus test. It was the litmus test to be able to show the reaction of Heshbon, which was, again, irrational because this nation that's on a roll, plowing through Mitzrayim in the desert towards Eretz Yisrael, not to let us take the highway and buy a little snacks and water on the way and come through, and instead put his entire nation at risk, was irrational. It must have been because God hardened his heart. This act, almost a setup for Moshe Rabbeinu, to ask him to peacefully go through, was to show us how indeed HaKadosh Baruch Hu deals with these nations. That's the only way to explain the stubbornness of Heshbon, of Sihon rather, Melech HaAmori. And that is because God, in fact, deals with our enemies when they cross the threshold of evil in that manner. And added bit of information number 2, and that is that right prior to Moshe reflecting on the way that he sent messengers, the second pasuk, which I didn't tell you about before, and this is Perek Bet, pasuk Kafeh. It's a critical, very telling pasuk, where after he tells Moshe that I'm putting this nation in your hands, you are going to be successful, you are going to overcome them, he says as follows. I'm reading every word of this pasuk. Hayom hazeh ahel tet bachtecha v'yiratecha p'nei ha'amim tahat kol hashamayim. Today, I will begin putting the fear of you in the eyes of the nations. I will begin to instill awe of Am Yisrael in the nations. They'll be gripped with trembling and trepidation. All Tahat Kol HaShamayim, the nations of the earth under the heavens. That's an addition, obviously. It's a fascinating, famous midrash that she quotes that, in fact, as with the battle in Israel under Yeshua ben Nun, that Moshe Rabbeinu prayed for the sun to be frozen, so to speak, in its tracks and not move. Tahat HaShamayim. They'll hear about you and they will be trembling with fear. What is this phenomenon? Why is this something that is a positive? What do we gain from such fear? And in fact, the Ramban here on the spot tells us that this is really a promise to Am Yisrael in the near future promise, going forward for the battles of Yeshua when they enter the land and were to wage war against the seven nations. And Haskuni explains that it was really going to give the seven nations a little taste of what Am Yisrael is all about. Defeating the big boys out there, Sihon and Og. And indeed, with not so many months later, Yeshua sends his spies to Yericho. The word came back that don't worry about it. Their hearts are melting already. You won the war before it even began. And that fear was really a gift to Am Yisrael, that promise that in times of salvation, when we're rolling, that's the way, that's the perspective they're going to have. And I believe that this is a paradigm for all times of Jewish salvation. And otherwise, Jewish salvation is inexplicable. Hayom hazeh ahel, Hashem says. Today is the starting point. Today will be the model for all times in the future. When I am behind Am Yisrael in a very blatant manner, that they will be gripped with fear. We saw this play out in the book of Esther during those days. It says, Nafal pachat ha'amim. Without Am Yisrael lifting a finger leading up to that day of war on the 13th of Adar, it says that the nations, the 75 nations under the kingdom of Ahashverosh, were gripped with fear. And they were intimidated. Many of them converted to Judaism independently. And of course, on that great day of battle, we overtook our enemies. I'm sorry, it was 120 nations. It was 75,000 of our enemies that waged war. They were silly enough to continue with that war that we killed with no casualties on our side. And so on and so forth. The times of the Hashmonaim, some centuries later, in the miracle of Hanukkah, the 6-day war. How do you explain the irrational behavior, first of all, that God is hardening their heart, and second of all, how they are falling so quickly? It's that fear that they're gripped with. And that fear is not just something strategic to set Am Yisrael up during times of salvation and the future that we're living right now today, in order so that victory come to them in a more seamless manner, but it's part of the objective, really, of these times of redemption and of the existence, though short, of the purpose of the existence of mankind. And that is, fear is the beginning of consciousness. Fear of the enemy, but fear of those on the eyes of those who see the enemy's fall, is the beginning of consciousness of the rest of the nations of the world. Who is the nation of God? And allow us to enlighten them, and that there is a God, and the oneness of God, and the sanctification of God's name, and thereby the objective of the existence of mankind. It all starts with fear, which brings consciousness. Says Hashem to Moshe Rabbeinu, Hayom hazeh, today, in the battle you'll wage against Sihon Melech HaAmori, today, I will begin to put fear in the eyes of the nation. In your eyes, in their eyes, looking upon you, they would tremble. Says the Emet Davar. That's close by, Yiratecha, that's far away, in the distant future as well. Today is the day that I set my rule down, that when you're on a roll, and there's times of salvation, I will not only harden the heart of evil, but they will fear you and tremble from you, and it'll lead all the way to the great days of redemption and salvation. In our time that we live through as we speak, that they, in fact, will recognize us, and by extension, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and the purpose of creation and mankind will be played out in those great days. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen v'amen.